You're listening to The Griffin Show, a podcast hosted by the Cambridge University International Entrepreneurs Club. We're the hosts, Abiel, Taha, and Joanna. In each episode, we will be chatting with a successful entrepreneur, founder, and CEO about their story, what they have learned along the way, and market insight of the industry. Hello and welcome to The Griffin Show, a podcast hosted by the Cambridge University International Entrepreneurs Club. I'm Abiel, the president. Today, we're happy and honored to be joined by Russell Beattie. Russell is the director, head of Asia Pacific, Future and Options and OTC Clearing at the Bank of America Merrill Lynch. He has over 15 years of experience in being company director in Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, and Australia, and had previously held director-level positions in Barclays Investment Bank, Deutsche Bank, and HSBC. Hello, Russell. It's an honor to have you.
Thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.
Let me start off by asking you the first question about leadership. So if you don't mind. So having over 15 years of experience in being a company director and a responsible officer in Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore, and Australia, like a lot of places, can you describe your leadership style?
There's a couple of things I think I want to just bring out here. I think you need to have a slightly different leadership style depending on the scenario that you're working on, okay? I think having one particular playbook or leadership playbook or style, if you like, that you currently have, and deploying that time and time again is not the best outcome that you're going to get. And if I can just take a couple of minutes just to set that description up for you. So say, for example, you have a team and you're dealing with a crisis management situation, all right? And in the case of a crisis situation, whatever that may be, you're required to have, it's usually over a short span of time. The outcome that you're trying to drive is extremely specific. It's probably, it's for a day or 2 days or 3 days or wherever it is. The team that you have, you need to be incredibly focused on driving that particular outcome for that particular time. Now, in that particular example, your particular leadership style, frankly, would probably be more dictatorial, all right? This is what we're doing. This is where we're trying to get to. Everyone knows their jobs. Let's go and do it, okay? It's not really open, frankly, it's not really open up to a broader discussion. It's very focused on driving specifically for a particular crisis management process. And in that particular scenario, you tend to find that a lot of the individuals that you have on your team have been trained to deal with that particular crisis before it arrives, all right? Now, I won't go into some boring banking type sort of scenarios around that, but like a great example would be, a non-banking example would be, say, fighting a bushfire, all right? Like you're there, there's a fire, you get called out, you all get stuck into it, and your job is to save property, save life, and get the job done and to put the fire out. Now, the other side to it is, say, in a big, large financial institution, banking organization, which I work, some of the projects or some of the roles that you have could take multi-years to complete, 1, 2, 3 year projects. So clearly your leadership style in that crisis management situation is not going to work in a normal project type sort of driven process, okay? And in that particular style, in that particular example, I think from a leadership role, what you need to do is to be able to, and I use this term a lot, is putting a stake in the sand, making it very clear that this is where we are headed, okay? Now, in Asia Pac in particular, it's a very complex region. We have like 9 different regulatory structures. We have 9 affiliates, and there's probably another 4 or 5 countries which we're not actively participating in that listed derivative markets. So it's a very complex market. So to assume that you as a leader knows every single piece of information to get to that role and micromanage the process is like, there's no way you can do that. Okay. You know, it's language skills, it's product knowledge, it's everything else. But what a strong leader does in that particular example is clearly define and put a stake in the sand where you say, right, team, in 2 years' time, when this project is completed, these are the following things we want to complete. This is what we need to get done. Okay. Now, in that example, your involvement is probably it may be weekly updates, it may be bi-monthly updates, it may be quarterly updates. All right. And in that particular example, you need to step back and let your team get on with the job and make sure that you have the right people in the right seat doing the right jobs. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so it's very different, isn't it? Can you see the example, right? So I think the key that I'm just trying to get to is it's important to have different gears in your leadership style. All right. Sometimes you need to crank it up and be short-term focused and dictatorial. In other times, you need to be more sort of open and communicative and working through these types sort of solutions. So that's the challenge that I have personally had over the years, is building that type of multi-structured process as far as when I'm dealing, you know, in leadership roles.
Absolutely. So I think beside being a leader is very important. So being a good leader is absolutely important. Now, from a leader perspective, what do you think is the main and the most important attribute of being a successful team?
There's a couple, all right? The first one, I think, which we all don't do very well, is listen, right? Just the simple act of listening, okay? And allowing people to communicate and allowing people, sometimes it's venting, which is frustrating because you see where they're going. Other times, you know, your ability to listen and concisely work through the wood from the forest, if you like, all right, to work out what is the important factors around it and to coach and guide people to get the best out of what they can do, all right? You know, as I said earlier, in complex regions like Asia Pac, it's near impossible for you to micromanage a process. So you have to be very dependent on having key staff, key individuals who have the room to develop. And in some cases, you know, let's be honest here, that may mean allowing them to make mistakes. Okay. Yep. Sometimes that may be the case. All right. Sometimes you have to step back and let them go down a path. You can advise them, but maybe they have to learn that themselves. All right. And then they come through. And with leadership in particular, and, you know, the challenge is that it's an ever evolving process. It's not something that basically, hey, I've got a playbook for leadership. That's it. I've been doing this job for 26 years. You know, 15, 16 years of that has been in Asia Pac. You know, I know everything. That's so not true. All right. And I think particularly with the cultural mix that we have across Asia Pac, one of the key factors is being able to listen and to evolve as you go along to ensure that you get the most optimum outcome from your team.
Absolutely. So you mentioned something about culture. So I assume as a background like yours, you have worked in many different countries, specifically in Asia Pacific. So do you mind me asking, have you personally encountered any culture conflicts, any culture matter? Or if not you, how do you solve the culture conflict between your colleagues maybe?
The short answer is that Asia Pac is such a huge area. Like if you're running a project or a business meeting in Mumbai, or you're in Tokyo running a business meeting or a project in there, or Korea or China or Australia, you know, like that's a huge demographic cultural shift, all right, when you go through. So there's been no doubt about it, what's kept me incredibly motivated and over these years is the sheer diversity that I've encountered over that period of time. Okay. And again, it's been a learning experience. Okay. Like, so if I use, for example, Northern Asia, and I don't want to put people in pigeonholes, but in general, Northern Asia, Korea, Japan, tend to be very procedurally driven. And so if I come to them with an idea or a process, I have to come there knowing that I have to spend probably more time and energy at the start of the process in making sure that we're communicating the goals, the outcomes, the direction and the process. And then once they're fully on board, they're off and running. In India, in Mumbai in particular, or Hyderabad when I've been out there as well, they're a little bit more like, hey, I just want to get it done. All right. So it's like, they are very focused around how do we get it done? How do we do it? Let's work through it. And in that particular case, it's a little bit easier in the sense that you just put that stake in the sand and say, okay, that's where we need to go. How do we get there? All right. And, it's less at the starting point. But what I tend to find, say, in some of those areas is that you need to make sure that you're much more diligent around the monthly, quarterly updates, all right, and to make sure that everyone's pointed in the same direction, okay? Whereas, say, in Korea and Japan, if you invest the time at the beginning, the updates are really they're off and running, okay? So culturally, it's, very different to how you be able to process it. In particular, if I can, there's been some great examples, for example, in client meetings, all right? Not so much in conflict resolution, but in large organizations, when you have to deliver, say, a bad message or something. Like, for example, there might have been, a great example would be, I had a very senior Japanese counterpart at a bank, wanted us to build a project for them. The project seemed to make sense from my seat. It made sense from a regional seat. But when I went to global, and they compared all the projects around, and prioritization globally, okay, our particular project that I was trying to get done in Japan, didn't meet the top 5, so it didn't meet the cutoff, okay? So unfortunately, I didn't get the resource allocation I needed to complete it. So I had to go back to Japan and deliver that message, all right? And say, listen, it's important to us in the region, but globally, look, I'm sorry, you're important, but I just can't get this done for you, okay? Now, I remember distinctly in that example, this particular gentleman was clearly disappointed, completely upset, and it was a pretty tough meeting. And if you've ever been in a business meeting in Japan, your hands are on the desk, both feet are on the ground, everyone's wearing suits, you're sitting upright. It's very formal. It's a very formal meeting, okay, as we go through, and so they are. And in that particular example, I realized that I wasn't making any progress here. So what I did was, because I felt apologetic for myself, because I was the senior leader at the time trying to do it, I did 2 deep bows of apology in front of him in this meeting in a very formal sense. And that was a sign of absolute respect to him, that I acknowledged the seriousness of the problem. I was personally taking and committing to that problem, all right, the responsibilities to that. And his attitude instantly changed, all right? And he almost become apologetic to me, saying, no, it's okay. You know what I mean? Like, wow. please, okay? Like, that simple cultural act of humility, if you like, was very powerful in that particular example. Now, to get to the point, if I did that at a meeting in Australia, for example, all right, they'd probably have a little giggle and say, who's this guy? Do you know what I mean? Like, what are you talking about? It doesn't make sense. But that gives you a good example. I think as you spend time in the region, and one of the great things about being in the banking sector in Asia Pac, as I said, is the cultural diversification. How you conduct yourself in Japan is very different to how you conduct yourself in Singapore and Hong Kong. Very different to how you conduct yourself in Mumbai, Australia. And mainland China is different again. So So yeah, look, it's a valid point, and it's an evolving process as you progress through your career.
Definitely. So the experience in Japan that you share is very interesting. So let me ask you. So as a leader in that managed team in a lot of different places, for example, Singapore, Japan, India, what do you think is the most effective form of communication with your teams?
I think two things. So let's just, when I said, and it was important that I put that at the front of the talk, crisis management versus normal project. So let's just park crisis management for now, okay? Because that's just something that happens from time to time. And, you know, as I said, you've got to shift gears as you go through. So in normal business practice, I think it's incredibly important as a leader, as to clearly define where we're headed, okay? And I use that terminology a lot about putting a stake in the sand, all right? And in a lot of meetings, what I come up with a couple of little catchphrases in these team meetings, particularly at the beginning of these projects, is, you know, in 2022, when we're sitting around having a couple of drinks before the holidays of Christmas in 2 years' time, what we're going to be talking about is the success of this project. And these are the following things that we're going to be, you know, justify our success, X, Y, Z. All right. And I think what I'm trying to say there is my style, is my way of saying, look, that's where we need to get to. That's what we're going to manage our, you know, our results are based on. And these are the following things that we have to achieve. Now, you know, you'd clearly understand that, particularly as a leader, is that it's not a straight line to get to those goals, okay? Particularly being in a big organization, you know, there's ups and downs and paths around, and sometimes you may think I'm going right off on tangent, and then you come back on, and then, but at the end of the day, every time that we have a weekly catch-up, a monthly catch-up, quarterly catch-up, whatever it is, through these particular project teams and what we're trying to do and how we're trying to manage, we always go back to the 2 or 3 very clear, concise goals that we set ourselves, and that's where we want to get to. All right, that's the point that we want to get to. And you know, I'm just about, as you know, you mentioned earlier, I've just started my mandatory compliance leave because it's coming up to the end of the year. And over this time, it's about spending a little bit of time myself over this period, obviously, is to identify what the key core catchphrases are going to be that I'm going to use in the business for 2021 and 2022. Because those catchphrases, those clear, concise action items that reflect the goals that we're trying to build as a business, will be repeated time again, again, and again, and again. And what I found is, as a leader, if you are consistent with your goals, consistent in the message, and you are consistent in the way that you deliver that message, all right, the team, and then let your team do their job, they rally, they feel empowered, all right, and you acknowledge their success, and then you can collectively, towards the end of the project, you know, you all agree what, you know, celebrate the success collectively as a team. But being, you know, to your point, being very concise and being very focused on what the outcome is going to be, and keeping a very concise message over that period of time.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your information and your advice in terms of leadership. So now I want to ask you something about market insight. So as a leader in the banking industry, what do you think the pandemic in terms of COVID has affected the future of the banking industry? So did COVID change quite a bit of your perspective towards the future of your industry?
The shorter answer is yes. I think, you know, I've been on a lot of panels this year, industry panels and discussions. And a lot of the discussions have been around lessons learned, particularly around the market volatility in first quarter. All right. That market volatility in first quarter frankly, was generational in nature. All right. As I said, I've been doing futures for 26 years, 27 years now. That was the most intense volatile period in a 25-year period. Okay. And what's interesting is that occurred during that period. When that occurred, we had nearly 80% of staff working from home. So the sheer fact that, we were able to handle, the industry as a whole, not just our organization, but the industry as a whole, was able to handle the huge level of volatility, the huge amount of volumes, the huge amount of margin transfers, capital injections and fluctuations that went through, with 80% of people working from home. And frankly, largely, there was delays and there was frustrations, and as you would in any particular crisis scenario, right, that we went through. But in general, the markets handled it extremely well. So then the next question you have to say to yourself, okay, if we were able to handle such an amazing crisis situation with 80% working from home, the question that we have to say to ourselves is, what's the rush to get back to the office? to be honest, all right? What's the rush? Now, the only challenge that I have, again, going back between crisis situation and normal BAU, business as usual, business practices. Okay, clearly we could handle a crisis situation. Everyone's on focus. Everyone's on point. Everyone's directorial. There's no one's disputing it. Everyone knows their jobs. They're trained for this. Let's get on with it. Okay, so that's fine, and we can do that from home. I think the challenge that we have is that we started having huge, 50% of our staff, say, permanently working from home. You tend to lose, and I've noticed this, you tend to lose a significant amount of creative, personal interaction. I know it's important, the sheer fact that you and I are having this discussion now via Zoom, and we're all set up now, aren't we? All right, we've all got the lighting, we've all got the screens, we've got the technology, we're all done. We know we can do it, but it's the subtleties in these meetings. Now, let me go back to and let me just say this. Let me go back to that example in Japan where I was delivering that message to that senior Japanese banker. Do you think that I would have the same effect or the same outcome by me having that exact same conversation and bowing here on a screen versus actually him physically seeing me in his office showing that commitment?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would argue probably not. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's definitely a driving agenda to get people some more flexibility to work from home. I think that's right. I think that sort of makes sense. I think there's going to be certain roles within the industry, maybe not say frontline banking industry, but certainly sort of say vendor support, technology support, software quant code writers, that sort of thing. They may be far more productive working from home or an environment they feel comfortable with. And I think it's not going to go away, all right? But I doubt very much that we're going to see, 80% of frontline, investment banking staff. I think more and more people are keen to get back to the office. But look, to your point, I think there's going to be a compromise of some particular kind, and certainly there's going to be an element. Now, what is that percentage? We'll have to see over the next year once the vaccine comes in and people start getting back to normal. But yeah, it's definitely changed how we've done. It's definitely changed how we're doing business.
It's amazing to know that even 80% of colleagues that staying at home, they can still, the bank can still be business as usual. It's very surprising.
It's crazy, isn't it? Like really,
crazy,
like I've had, and it's not just our organization. It's like, as I said, I deal closely with 9 exchanges and CCPs. So Hong Kong Exchange, Singapore Exchange, JPX in Japan, ASX in Australia. And they're all exactly the same. Like it's not a pocket. It's not Hong Kong. It's not Singapore. It's the entire world. all right, as operating it. And I think particularly what I've seen is obviously in the Western hemisphere at the moment, with Europe and the US, in fact, it's probably, frankly, it's probably 95% of the teams working from home, and they're still working from home, okay? And they're still operating from home. I found it, to be honest, I found it very difficult because I remember I was working at home for the first week or so, and then a small crisis situation evolved. And maybe I wasn't set, it was early. This is like talking February, March. And I probably wasn't set up as well as I am now. In those days, I had my BlackBerry, my phones and everything else. And I said, I can't do it from here. I can't manage this from home. Like, I just physically can't. So I immediately just packed off and went straight back to the office and put my mask on and sat at the office. And it caused a bit of a ruckus with our COO team. They go, what are you doing back? But, at that particular time, maybe I was a little bit old school. I needed the screens, I needed the technology, I needed the phones, I needed everything to actually manage it. But then once I managed that crisis down and things went back to business as usual, BAU, I found that I then started to invest some time in my own setup at home to be able to handle it, all right? And now I think you find that most people they've invested in technology and laptops and lighting and speakers and all sorts of stuff so that they can get, they can be far more flexible as far as to be able to offer that.
Yeah, but it's very, very interesting. It's like just by looking at those tall office buildings all around the world, for example, in London, Hong Kong, New York, and Sydney, you can't simply imagine like a year ago, maybe, that all these buildings will be completely without any colleagues, or at least like 20 people going in, and then people are still doing business as usual, even those like big banks, big corporates. It's certainly amazing, surprising. It might be actually be the future, maybe, arguably, some people may suggest that. And it might be just it shifted like 50 years earlier that people start to consider the fact that, oh, we can actually completely working from home instead of going to those fancy tall glass buildings around.
You make a very good point. So let me just close out this point, if I may. All right. If I go back 20 years ago, I started down on the Sydney Futures Exchange on the trading floor in 1993, 94. Okay. And that wasn't, I'm sure everyone's seen the screens. That was an open outcry system. Now it looked chaotic, very special bunch of individuals down there. I remember fondly being down there. Frankly, I wasn't particularly good at it. Okay, the open outcry. All right, everything had to be mental. Everything had to be sort of on paper. Everything was very aggressive. You stood up all day. You know what I mean? So frankly, having just come out of a very analytical economics degree, where I was doing bond pricing formulas and writing everything, it was a complete opposite to what I effectively been trained for, to be honest. Okay, so I transitioned to screens in the office pretty quickly. Okay, so I was down on the floor for a few years and did my training and then moved up. But the point that we bring up in the industry is that we call it the electrification. So, that trading floor closed down, one in Hong Kong closed down, SGX closed down, Tokyo closed down. We all moved to screens. It's categorically no way in the world we could have handled the volumes that we saw in first quarter this year with 80% of people working from home. It was the sheer fact that the industry, the client, and the FCMs, the futures, clearing commission merchants, investment banks, everyone's invested in electrification. And the electronic trading process where, either it's fully STP. So when that means straight through processing, there's no manual process, we're very limited. If there is a manual process, each year we try to improve and we try and, build an automated process so it's straight through so we don't have to do it. There's no one writing tickets anymore. There's no one timestamping. You know what I mean? Like, you just got to think. And that's just, to your point about 50 years, that was just 20 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, that we were in that situation, all right? And the great situation, give you a good example, in let me just make sure I get the numbers right here, 1999, 98, 99, when the Sydney futures floor closed down, one of the brokers I was working for there at the time had 86 people on their head count running that business in Sydney. All right, so that was night desk, day desk, floor operations, 86 people. Today, they have 3 people.
Wow.
Doing the same business. Okay.
Wow.
In fact, they're doing more. All right. So in 26 years that since I've been doing this role, well, so when the floor changed down in the, before 2000, 86 people, they're now down to 3. And that's not because they're de-investing. That's not because they don't consider it an important business. It's not because they're sort of winding back. Literally, it's an example of electrification and disruption in the industry. All right. And you make a very good point, because one of the challenges, particularly with your audience, all right, you are the future leaders of the industry. Okay. And it's this type of investment in your members that basically you've got to look ahead to see where we're going to be in the next, you said 50 years. Frankly, it's far less than that. Like in the next 20 years, I'll be passing on to you guys and you'll be stepping in, all right? So you'll be being interviewed instead of myself. And so you have to say to yourself, that's a constant evolving process and disruption as we move through this industry. And this year has been a great example of that investment being able to handle those volumes with effectively, as I said, 80% of staff working from home.
As you just mentioned, our audience. So our audience is mainly from the Judge Business School in Cambridge. So most of them are startup entrepreneurs. They're founders of startup companies, or they encourage or they admire their entrepreneurial thinking. But many people say that large corporates have such a broad hierarchy system, suppressing entrepreneurial thoughts. But as a leader in a very established large organization, how would you promote entrepreneurship within your organization?
Excellent question. All right. And it's a very challenging topic. All right. There's no doubt about it. And again, the industry has evolved. So pre-financial crisis, 2005 to say 2008, all right, that particular growth period, particularly in Asia Pac, all right, for investment banking in the region. It was when we look back on it, that was the heyday in the sense, not because we're out, writing risky assets or anything like that, but it was a process where you had the ability to come up with an idea, and as long as it made, let's be honest, financial sense, okay, all right, and the outcome of the investment was multiples of the actual initial investment. So it was a very simple calculation, all right. You didn't take into consideration, rightly or wrongly, you didn't take into consideration all sorts of different social factors or anything else like that. You just took in a monetary factor. So the run up to the crisis there to 2008 was really around, you could get stuff done pretty quickly and drive the needle and move the business and go into new markets and release new products and get involved. And during that period, you could do it relatively quickly. Okay. You didn't have, in those days, you didn't have the same level of fintech technology. All right. We still didn't have that terminology. We certainly didn't have, but there was certainly, where you came across a process, frankly, you threw heads at it. Okay. And you could get stuff done as long as you could end up making money at the end of the day. So that was the sort of process. Post the financial crisis, what we've seen, and rightly so, has been a very significant introduction of regulatory reform. Okay. Now that regulatory reform has been all encompassing. not just in the States, not in Europe, it's also out here. Now, if you think about it, as I said, we've got 9 affiliates, 9 countries, 9 CCPs that we're dealing with, that they all have their own individual regulators as well. Okay, so now the banking sector is incredibly regulated. Our focus in the banking sector is, and this is just on everyone's mantra, is responsible growth. Okay, we don't want to be up 40% one year, down 20%. We don't want to be up, down, up, down. We want flat CAGR growth, ideally 5, 10, 15% CAGR growth, steady growth as we go through. And so when we're looking at projects and plans, it's really about making sure that we maintain sustainable, responsible growth in the markets. Now, to your point, the challenge with that, if I'm sitting from a pure entrepreneurial seat, okay, I've just finished my master's degree at Cambridge. I'm bubbling with ideas. I'm trying to drive out. That is a challenging structure to come into, okay? Because, no one goes, hey, if I do this, we're going to get 30% growth. People want this sustainable growth. And so your comment is fairly valid, okay, in the sense that you want to be able to do that, all right? What we do, though, is other large organizations have been investing in startup companies, fintech investment specifically, and it may sit outside the main banking structure. It doesn't necessarily sit in my part of the world, but certainly there's resources allocated globally to look at specific projects to help drive those types of outcomes, all right? And those particular ideas and those particular things are what will then eventually get moved back into the business, all right, to help streamline the various aspects of the business that we want to do. Now, it's interesting you say, I had a very close colleague who was on my team for a number of years, huge amount of respect for him. He rolled out the algo program for us across Asia Pac, very complex, built the infrastructure, helped us through the regulatory framework, put the whole project in place. When that was done, the challenge of sitting in that seat was very challenging for him because it went from actually, hey, I'm building, developing, bringing this new technology to the seat to, hey, it's now deployed. It's now business as usual. It's now, it's now moving to a more user management process, okay? And his particular style or his particular DNA, I found it very difficult to keep him in the firm, all right? Because he was very focused and he was very focused on doing something else. So he ended up, with our blessing, we parted ways. He went off and he left the safe financial structure of a large organization, all right? He was a director and everything else. So he was doing well in his career and highly regarded because he delivered this project. But he wanted to go to a more simplistic startup type firm with more risk, like he was willing to take that risk factor to go and to live his dream. And frankly, that dream meant that he spent time in Jakarta, spent time in Malaysia. I think he went to Hanoi. He spent 6 months project in Hanoi, helping someone build a project. Did you see what I'm saying? Like, yeah. That entrepreneurial explorer type spirit, is a boom bust type thing. And the big banks like we are going to struggle to compete with that, okay, to be honest, okay? But what a big bank like ours does support is if you are focused on the broader goals and you want to build something that's sustainable and that will be there for we build things to last, okay? We're not fly by the night. We build things to last. If you have that mindset and you have the mindset that you want to sit there in place, working for a large organization, can be incredibly rewarding, all right, particularly as you build your career over the years. But very valid point, all right, as I used in that example.
You mentioned how a startup would be much more compatible in terms of the fast pace, in terms of traditional banking industries. But at the same time, you also say that as a leader in the banking industry, you guys do invest a lot in startups, especially in the fintech. So fintech has recently become one of the most common industry or topic for startups. Do you view that as more like an opportunity or as a threat to the banking industry? And as a leader, what are you going to do about it?
What I say is bring it on. You know, like, again, if I just, like, it's great. I mean, disruptive change is incredibly important. I mean, again, let's go back to my example. Like, I had, you know, all these people down on the Sydney futures floor wearing their colorful jackets, wanting to do that for the rest of their lives. Okay, you know what I mean? Like, and in fact, if I take a photo, if I may, just to digress for a sec, if I take a photo of the Sydney futures floor alumni of the couple of hundred people that are physically down there, the reality is probably less than 10% of those people are actively employed in investment banking today. All right. I use that example about that firm that had 86 people in Sydney. There's now 3. So, you know, those people, others have found roles, yes, but, you know, frankly, a lot of people have left the industry, okay, as we've moved forward. So, you know, change is going to come. One of the most important things in my seat, you know, is that I rent my seat, all right? I'm only here for a period of time, and my job is to get my book, my team, my business that I have responsible to the best possible place that I can get it, so that at some particular time, I can pass it on to somebody else. All right, that's what large organizations, banking organizations are. That's the focus on responsible growth, okay? You know, it's not about, well, let me get some short-term gains. It's about what can I do materially to be able to drive this business, you know, ideally generationally, okay? And, you know, like, I'm 56 now, so clearly I'm in a situation that I'm probably in the 4th quartile of my career, not the first like you guys are. So, you know, I'm very focused about stewardship and making sure that, you know, we're in the best place. Now, what does that mean? Getting back to your question, if that means bringing in new and accepting and embracing new trends, new technologies, new platforms for us to do our job better, absolutely. Like I said, bring it on, because that is what is incredibly important and responsible as a leader. Okay, it's not the short-term goal; it's that medium long-term goal. Am I doing the right thing to be in a position to pass my business on to the next person who takes this role, and they can take it from me? So the challenge, if I may, sorry, but the challenge is how does an entrepreneur, how does a fintech startup get connected with a large organization that's got 250,000 people? All right. Now that is a challenge. All right. There's no doubt about it. I don't have at my level, you know, like, I run my business, but I don't have fintech investment dollars. All right. That's definitely, you know what I mean? That's not my day job. Okay. So the point is that you have to do in an organization is you have to get to a stage that you're plugged in somehow with the right infrastructure. And I know a lot of the big investment banks across the region are investing, are looking, and are spending a lot of time trying to look at how they can improve their systems and platforms as they go forward in the next 10 to 15 years.
Definitely, that's very interesting. I mean, bring it on, for you, absolutely. So, let me ask you one more question. So, you mentioned a lot about client relationship. How do you do different forms of communications and stuff? So, as a very experienced banker and a leader in both buy side and sell side industry, what kind of advice would you give our audience in terms of relationship or client management?
I think and particularly, I'm going to use Asia Pac again because of the different cultures. All right, like, you know, I went, you know, my education's in Australia. All right, so no doubt about that. Most of Australians are linguistically challenged. All right, so we're not bilingual. We don't have, like, my children are much better at whatever. So particularly in the region, like I'm in Japan, I don't speak Japanese, so I have to take someone in with me. I'm in Korea, I don't speak Korean, I have to take someone in with me. All right. I go to mainland China, I've got to have someone with me as well to be able to help me through that process. Okay, because those Northern Asian countries are still heavy, well, they do speak English, they're heavily dominated by their local language. Okay, so it's really important to make sure that you have that client interaction. Okay, but there's a common thread. All right, so let's put language aside to start and some of the cultural significance of each of those individual countries, put that aside. But there's a couple of threads that I find with client management. The first thing is you've got to be committed to ensuring that you're looking at the long term. If you're trying to print a short-term trade and you know it's a bad trade, you won't have a customer in a year's time. Okay? You need to be committed to ensuring that whatever you say, you will do. Now, it doesn't take a PhD to sort of work through this, okay? These are very simplistic things. So you have to be honest, have integrity, be committed, okay? Follow up, all right, with what comments that you have. And one of the things that I think that I've worked in my playbook, particularly when I'm in the region, is before COVID, when I was traveling, I used to travel a lot around the region face to face because personal interaction with clients was important. This year we haven't been able to do it, so it's all by Zoom and WebEx. But it's the commitment to being there on a regular basis. So I will ensure, for example, that I will go to Korea to see our 5, 10 top clients in Korea 4 times a year. Okay, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, religiously. I never miss a quarter. I go see our top 10 clients in Japan every quarter. And you do that around the region. And what that helps, that doesn't necessarily mean that I have a team to help me with the details. Okay, so I'll go into the meeting, take the meeting, I'll listen to them, I see them on a regular basis. I build a rapport with the senior managers that I'm seeing there once a quarter. And for example, in Japan, my Japanese colleague will take the notes, follow up on the meeting notes, and I'll critique that back on a weekly basis. So that's the only way I'm being able to do it. So to cover the region, just let's think about that, okay? If you're doing a week in Japan, a week in Korea, all right, a week in India, a week in Australia, a week in Singapore, all right, and you do that once a quarter, you're on the plane a lot. You're traveling a lot, okay? And so what I've done with my team in particular is I've got key specific individuals in each one of those locations that I trust implicitly, okay, in the content. And I come in as the face of the business. I'll talk through these issues. I'll document these issues. But I am 100% dependent on my team to follow up, through the issue resolution, tracking new business and everything else that's go through. So the biggest key point to me in the region is being organized and structured. All right. And once I've done that organization, I've done that structure, people understand it and they know that they're being looked after. If I miss a quarter, or I miss 2 quarters or 3 quarters or everything else, then clients start to think that they're being deprioritized. All right. And then they're less likely to give you new business. They're less likely to give you more greater opportunities as they come along. And in many cases, the sheer fact that I've been and spent time with them in that particular week, new business comes along after it, not because I'm a particular special salesperson, but because I was the last person that was physically there. I was the last one showing commitment. I was the last one who was in their office chasing that down. And that requires a huge amount of travel. Now, in COVID, we've had to sort of rechange that, all right? And I'll, to presentations like this, okay, where we're putting people on, we're seeing people on WebExes and everything else, as opposed to physically traveling. But being organized and committed to a client-focused agenda is incredibly important.
So the last question, if you could give one piece of advice and a book recommendation, one book to our audience, what would that be?
I want to challenge people to look at where their strengths and weaknesses are, okay? And everyone has different strengths and weaknesses. I'm constantly in a role. I've been looking on what I'm going to do courses this year, as far as what additional courses can I do. And I've just told you I'm in the fourth quarter of my career, right? But I still need to get involved and do courses, still need to be motivated as I go through. So what I would challenge you to, I know that the audience here is very focused on finishing your master's degree at an outstanding institution, and all credit for you, all right? But the journey doesn't stop there, okay? And I would suggest to you to think what you feel is your weakness. Is it public communication? Is it speaking? Is it some sort of weakness and some skill set that you think that you can improve, you can focus on and be directed? And, spend the time over these, holiday period to self-reflect on that. Just take a bit of time and take honest opinion of yourself, and take some time to self-reflect on what you can do next year outside of the structured academic framework that you're talking about. And that's what I think is your focus. Like a book is great, but I think challenge yourself to identify something in particular, and something that is meaningful to yourself, and something that you feel that you will be a better person as you go into 2021.
Definitely. Thank you very much for the interview. Thank you, Russell, for your insight, for your experience, your recommendation and advice. Thank you very much. Yeah.
No problems at all. Listen, thanks very much. You guys are working very hard. These type of scenarios are difficult and take a lot of time and energy to develop. And I appreciate the time, and I look forward to working with you guys in the future. So thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for listening to the Griffin Show.
Thanks, guys.